All right, good morning, everyone. It's Michelle Aponte, your mortgage professional. Here today with a guest speaker, David Gale with Mud City Jacks. Dave, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
So today we're going to go over loans for 2 to 4 units and talk about loan qualification, underwriting, different options for financing, and then also talk about the types of issues that we have experienced with property conditions and how we can better assist our sellers or buyers in making decisions on property repairs that may be needed to help sell those properties quicker. So this is very informal. I'm going to go through the slides, but I welcome your questions as we go through. So it's an open conversation. So please do not hesitate to ask questions throughout. I will open up the chat also if you'd like to add anything in there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to David so he can talk more about himself and his company as a quick intro before we go into the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle, and everybody. Really appreciate this. I won't give you much of a commercial, but I think what's kind of fun for me in these kinds of things is to share with you that I'm really a lot like your prospective buyer of a first-time 2 or 4 unit, let's just say back away. So years ago in the 90s, I bought my first 2 unit and it kind of got me hooked. And 5 years ago, I was in the technology world and a friend of mine in the construction world said, hey, come on over to this dark side of construction. And he lured me with his magic. And I said, yes. And so here is the Mud City world. I immediately focused on the multi-unit world because it's been a passion of mine from the get-go. I love the idea of creating passive income, and I love helping others figure out how to do that for themselves too. Over the past 4 years, I've built several different groups and we purchased multi-units, which led to the formation of the Mud City Jacks. So initially we were going through handymen and general contractors, pretty much every 2 or 3 projects, we'd have to find somebody new. Prices went up, they disappeared, whatever. So we started our own company. You can read the slide. We're pretty focused on the multi-unit space, although we do help a lot of single family homeowners. We just don't advertise to that world. We focus in 2 big areas for multi-units, maintenance and repair, or maintenance and rehabs, and you can figure out what those are, I'm sure. What I like to do a lot, though, with these folks is help them figure out how to maximize the value of their investment over the lifetime of the investment. So what to do when, what gives you the most return, et cetera, et cetera. Just because we are in a networking function, you can read who my target customers are. If you ever find anybody who's interested in a multi-unit and just wants help or to talk to someone who loves talking about it, I'd be happy to help them out. Anyway, in a nutshell, that's us. Mud City Jacks, small-time general contractor, really passionate about the 4-unit and below space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Do you go out, are you just primarily Chicago? Do you go to the suburbs? How far out is your radius that you like to work in?
We go throughout Chicagoland. So I've got 3 crews that I work with most exclusively. And then I've got some bench crews that I'll tap when I have to. And they're one on the north side, one in the middle on the west side, and then one southwest. And the reason for that is because crews won't commute. There's just too much business everywhere. So like my north side guys won't go to Shearville in Indiana, whereas my southwest guys will. So yes, we'll cover, a pretty wide geographical area. And then I actually have crews that travel. So what is it? Mid-November, I've got a crew going to Wisconsin to start a resort property, an old cabin resort in Wisconsin, a rehab up there. So we have travel crews as well.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I did not know that. That's good to know.
But just to be clear, you do serve the northwest suburbs.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Some I don't love as much as others because they are challenging, let's just say, for the permitting process and all of that. And we just don't like them as much, even though they're lovely suburbs. I won't name names.
Hypothetically speaking, if the owner is willing to work without a permit, would you do it?
A lot of cases with a general contracting license for many types of projects, you actually do not need a permit, and or the owner can self GC and easy permit it. So there are ways around. Where I wouldn't really play is when you're dealing with rough plumbing. That's just sort of a no-no in Chicago, is to hide rough plumbing work. Everything else, it sort of depends. Roofing, same thing. Decks, same thing. Chicago's very sensitive to decks because of all the collapses 20 years ago, and then fire, and then plumbing, they just make a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But yes is the answer. We do a lot of our business no permit. It happens all the time. By the way, a GC with a license can do repair and replace with no permit in the city of Chicago. So if I'm not changing a footprint of something, I'm just refining something, you do not need a permit if you're hiring a GC.
I see. Thank you. That's awesome.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, David. All right. So we're going to talk about loan options for multi-units. So the different loan types for multi-units that we'll focus on today are going to be your standard conventional and FHA. With the conventional and FHA, we do also have renovation financing that allows us to finance repairs as part of the purchase. So it's one loan to acquire the property and also rehab the property. And the money for the construction is then paid out post-closing. So depending on the program that we're utilizing, the down payment varies widely. So 3.5% to 25% down. The lower down payment option is going to always be FHA. So for FHA, whether it's a 2-unit, 3-unit, or 4-unit property, we can put down as little as 3.5%.
But that would be an owner-occupied, right?
Owner-occupied, yep, because FHA is only owner-occupied. If it is owner-occupied for conventional, the minimum down payment for conventional 2-flat is 15% with PMI. And then the minimum down payment for a 3 to 4 unit for owner occupied, again, conventional, is 20%. So conventional is 15 to 20% for owner occupied.
I see.
If it's an investment purchase, it's always going to be a 25% down payment for an investor for the conventional. So very wide range. Now for credit qualification between the two products, FHA allows us to go down to a 580 with that same 3.5% down payment. And then conventional minimum is 620. Now I will say, if it's an investor and they have a 620 FICO, it still has to get approved through the automated underwriting system. So it does get challenging, because even though these are the qualification and guidelines provided, everything is automated. So the data is put through an automated underwriting system, and it has to also approve the credit file. So in my experience, if the credit score is low, it does get difficult to get approval for investors, especially on a multi-unit, because now you're adding layers of risk, just lower credit score, investment property. And then that rate is going to also be not so attractive. So it is a little bit more challenging, just FYI. So in terms of, well, so far, any questions on those couple of things? I know down payment and credit qualification are usually the top questions that I get for loan options.
Do you run into co-signers or somebody else giving you the down payment ever, Michelle? How does that change any of the deal parameters?
So you can receive gifts from family to help out with a down payment. 100% gift is totally fine. If it's a co-signer, it has to be an occupying co-signer. Otherwise, the down payment increases to 25%. And that's even with FHA. So yes, FHA is very strict with co-signers. Everyone has to occupy because they're an owner-occupied type of loan. But if you have a co-signer not occupying, well, now you're back to conventional down payment requirements. You might as well go conventional. So that was a great question. And then touching on the funds for the down payment, if it's an investment purchase, investors are not allowed to receive gifts. So investors must have their own assets for down payment. No gifts allowed for investors. Now for amortization types, there are mortgage loans from 10 years to 30 years. So we do have 10-year, 15, 20, 25, 30. Of course, 30 is the standard. And then outside of fixed rates, we do also have adjustable rate options, which are no one's using right now because it's available also FHA, but no one's going to go with an FHA adjustable arm, adjustable rate when they can do a fixed rates and not have to worry about the market adjusting. But it is an option. And then processing times typically are going to be 30 days, can be 45 days, depending on how long the initial inspection period takes and when we are, moving forward with that original appraisal. Ruby, good question. So can the down payment be taken from a retirement account? Yes, the down payment can be taken from a retirement account. That is acceptable. And usually with a retirement account, you may have the option to either take out a loan or do a withdrawal. So that's a very attractive option for many buyers, is to use funds from their retirement because they can pay themselves back at a very low rate and use that money for the down payment. Any other questions regarding any of these items? So down payment, credit qualification. No questions? Okay. So here is the conventional loan. So now we're going to go into a little more detail on qualification. So the conventional loan, so there's a cap on how many finance properties you can have. It's about 10 finance properties that lenders will allow. This is your typical, Fannie Freddie rules. And then in terms of assets, so we know what the conventional, the down payment's a little bit larger, right? 15 to 25% down, depending on number of units and occupancy. But in addition to that, we typically also have to show reserves. So for conventional loans, multi-units, we're looking at usually 6 months of reserves. And now the reserve is the mortgage payment. So 6 months worth of mortgage payments as available assets. And it doesn't have to be liquid. It can be money that is invested either in stock, mutual funds. It could be assets that are in a retirement account. We just have to be able to verify that whatever bank statements we're using can be liquidated. So if it is some sort of retirement account, we have to make sure that it's a retirement account that you can tap into, because there are some employers that offer some sort of retirement accounts that are only available at the time of retirement. So they can't access funds before retirement. So the funds have to be accessible in order to use them as reserves. And then if a buyer has multiple finance properties, well, now we have to figure out the unpaid balance of those mortgages, and then we're adding on an additional 2 to 8 months of the payments for those additional properties on top of the reserves for the subject property. So we do need extra assets to verify for conventional financing. The other thing for conventional financing to consider is that we are using the investor income. So whatever the applicant's income is, whether they're W-2, self-employed, and then whatever their current liabilities are. So current mortgage, any car loans, student loans, credit card payments. In addition to that, we do use rental income from the subject property. So if we have a 2-flat, we're able to use that second apartment. If they're occupying, we'll use a second apartment, and we will use 75% of whatever that gross rental income is. So if the rental income is $1,000, we're using $750 as additional income to qualify the applicants. Now, here's where it gets tricky. If we have a lease in place, we are using the rental income from the lease. If there is no lease in place, if the tenant is month to month or the property is vacant, then underwriting will use the gross rental income listed as the market rental value on the appraisal report. So again, if there's not a lease in place and tenants are month to month, or the property is vacant, the appraiser will put together a rent comparable schedule to give the market rental value. And then that's the number that underwriting uses to qualify. So then typically, once we have the income determined, on a conventional loan, the maximum debt to income ratios that we're looking at for qualification is just under 50%. And again, it has to be automated. It has to receive an automated underwriting approval. So we're putting everything into the automated underwriting system to make sure that it approves the scenario.
And this is on the gross, right?
We're using gross income. Yes, correct.
Does that blow your mind? Because it blows mine.
Well, you know, it's pretty flexible, isn't it? You know, up to 50%, right? I mean, because it's gross. Yeah. But it also has to get approved, you know? So when you're looking at multi-units, I mean, so banks are looking at this from layers of risk. So if it's a multi-unit, it's actually considered a riskier loan because we're using income from the property itself. But what if it's all vacant, right? There's less income. So understandably, that's why it makes it riskier. So all that's being considered when we're going through the automated underwriting system for that automated approval. But yes, it is pretty flexible, I would say, up to 50% debt to income ratio. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Did we pass the repair loans, or we didn't talk about it? I had to step out for a second.
No, we haven't got there yet.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay, so next is going to be the
yes.
FHA. So here's the FHA qualification. So FHA also uses 75% of gross rental income to qualify. And then for reserves, there's a lot less, you know, rigid guideline here. We have more flexibility. So we are able to qualify with 3 months of reserves are required, but only for the 3 to 4 unit properties. So if a buyer wants to purchase a 2-unit property with an FHA loan, they only need 3.5% down and no reserve. If they're buying a 3 to 4 unit home, however, then they need 3 months of reserves. And reserves cannot be gifts. So
why not?
They cannot be gifts. So if it is the down payment, now could be 100% gifts, but the reserve has to be their own money. So yes, so it gets a little bit tricky, but remember, reserves can also be assets that are not liquidated. So it could be investment accounts, and it also could be retirement accounts. But we must show that they have 3 months reserves for FHA. And that's only for the 3 to 4 units. So 3 to 4 units is, again, riskier. So that's where there are added conditions. Now, with COVID, we also have additional temporary guidelines that currently are only in place through month's end. And we don't know yet if FHA is going to extend these rules or if it's going to end. So for the last year or so, we've had to verify an additional 3 months of reserves for 2 to 4 units. So now that 2-unit property that didn't need a reserve, it actually does need 3 months temporarily. Or instead of using 75% of rental income, we can use 50% of the gross rental income to qualify the applicant. So it's one or the other. So this has made it a little more stricter, right? More difficult to get financing for multi-units under the FHA products. Now, an additional rule that applies to 3 to 4 units only is that the property itself has to qualify for the self-sufficiency test, which basically means that the income that is generated at 75%, the gross income for all of the units, whether it's owner occupied or not, cannot or must match, be equal to, or less than the proposed payment. So let's say that it's a 3-unit building and the rents are $1,000 each unit. That's $3,000. 75% of that is $2,250, $2,250. That is the maximum mortgage payment. Payment cannot exceed that. So lender just wants to make sure that the income generated by the property can support the mortgage. And if it doesn't, then we have to reduce the loan size to make sure that it does support that payment. So this usually becomes tricky if we're looking at properties in the city north side exceeding like 350, because property taxes are a little bit higher and rents are not, don't really coincide with the higher taxes. So 350 to 400, we're having to make sure that we're not running into a self-sufficiency test issue. So usually when a buyer is looking for 3 to 4 units, we really have to know what are the average taxes and rental income to make sure that they're looking in the right price range for the areas that they like. Any questions about the self-sufficiency test? Because that's a big one. And again, only for 3 to 4 unit properties. Okay, so the next thing is property condition. So FHA is a little bit stricter than conventional, and we all know that. The market's been showing that, sellers know that too. So property must meet minimum property standards. And so let's talk over some of the things that we see coming up. If I can change the slide. So the most common things that we see come up, and some of these will come up on a conventional appraisal as well. But number one is peeling paint. Peeling paint is the one thing that comes up on an FHA appraisal that will not come up at a conventional appraisal as a repair that must be completed prior to closing. Why is it a requirement? Because in the past it was lead-based paint. So if the home is older than 1978, that's a hazard and safety concern. And so that's why FHA requires that their paint, whether it's in the interior or exterior of the property, even if it's on the garage and it's just the trim of the window, must be scraped and repainted. In addition to that, broken steps, broken windows, again, hazardous items must be repaired. And then of course, leakage or water damage from previous leakage issues. So if you have a property that had a leakage issue in the roof and you see the water stains and you have an appraisal and they see the water stain, they're going to point that out. So ideally, they don't see those water stain issues, especially if it's been repaired. So that's where we're going to come back and talk to David about how a general contractor can help your sellers if they have any of those items, right? Broken windows, steps, cracked steps, peeling paint, or leakage. So David, please let us know how you can help us.
Well, I guess, again, a lot of this is maybe common sense, and a lot of you have maybe been through it. I thought as a former first-time investor buyer, you know, I went through this same thing. It's like, why would you hire a GC? You know, because there are people that like to do this type of work and they're more than capable. So I just left a few things there that are sort of the value add of why to hire a GC. And if somebody as an investor buyer is bringing some of these skills to the table and also the time and interest, it's a great way to save money is to take that general contractor layer out of there if you've got somebody to fill those shoes. What is a GC supposed to do? Again, maybe this is real common sense, but really they ought to be doing everything on this list. All of this, I think, is pretty obvious. The neighbors is one that I think often goes underlooked, but a general contractor should be responsible communicating with your neighbors, especially if somebody informs you, but even if not, letting them know if noisy work's going to happen, just saying hello, putting a face to the workers' names. It makes a huge difference. And your GC ought to know your neighbors. I mean, it's your investment. You're making an impact there. So that's a big thing I would look for. I'm sure you're familiar with how GCs charge, flat fee versus percentage. Percentages tend to range in the 10 to 25%, depending on size and type. Flat fees are just that, flat fees. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes you kind of get what you pay for with a flat fee that sort of runs out for the more complicated projects. So no hard advice on payment from my experience, other than look at each situation individually. Does all that kind of make sense? I know this is all kind of review probably for you guys, real common sense stuff.
I have a question actually. So
Please.
So building codes. So I know that if, like in the city of Chicago, if a building has violations, I mean, usually listing agents should have this information, and you guys can tell me, because I've had mixed reviews from agents on this, but the building code should be known up front, so that way, you know, we know up front if there's going to be any title issues, because this stuff is going to come up on title. So tell me more about how you assist with building codes and also with zoning. Like, do you offer like help to get the zoning certificate? I'm just curious as to how your company helps out with these things.
Happy to, because I sort of nerd out about zoning. I find myself sometimes on weekends and evenings reading the Chicago zoning code. It's scary. And my wife will validate this. So go to a site. There's a couple of sites. I always check these for any customers, friends, whoever. Second City Zoning, it's called. And it has, you can look up any address in the city. It lists the zoning, lists the explanation of that zoning. There's all kinds of information about the code. Yes, Second City Zoning, you got it. If you do a search, it'll come up. And then the Cook County Assessor's Office and property tax portals, respectively, allow you to look up violations of any property in the city. I can look at the history, I can see if it was resolved, and so on. So I check all of those sites out for anybody. The city of Chicago, it's Cook County Property Tax Portal and Cook County Assessor's Office. And you can search by PIN. Sometimes you can search by street address too, or you have to get the street address first. But that's what I do. So I search if there's been previous code and or active code violations. If the previous violations, what resolution happened, how long ago they were. And then that zoning thing. A lot of times with multi-units, from zoning, they're always grandfathered, okay? Chicago doesn't downzone stuff typically unless it's a planned area. But if you want to upzone something, that can be a real interesting discussion to have with your prospective buyer. And that's why looking at that zoning is so key. You may run into a tear down situation or something you could put another level on, as opposed to just a standard 2 or 4 unit. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Michelle, maybe a little bit too much.
No, that was helpful. Do you guys have any questions about these things listed on here?
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Dale. This is Ruby. So just a question, if the property is sold as is, you know, sometimes they disclose no surveys provided, violation is in place or some sort like that. I guess in terms of financing, you have to be upfront then with your buyer and saying, if you're getting a financing, we might not be able to get financing. Is that kind of the proper way to deal with your buyer if those things happen?
So if it's being sold as is, that means that the seller is not willing to do any repairs. I've actually had instances where the buyer takes on the repairs before closing. And of course, we have a conversation with the attorney because buyer's investing into a home that is not theirs. So it definitely has happened. And so to answer that, I mean, you can still show it, but and you can explain that the option to do repairs is available, you know, if they can come to an agreement with the attorneys, because what the seller's attorney is going to want to do is make sure that the seller is not liable for anything. So they'll want to make sure that whoever's doing the work is, you know, somebody licensed or bonded, depending on what the work is. So let's talk about that peeling paint, for example. So I've had buyers buy properties with peeling paint. I've had the complete basement, you know, peeling paint, and they've gone in there and they've painted the whole basement and gotten FHA loan. So when you do see sold as is, it doesn't mean that they cannot move forward. It just means that there has to be repairs completed that the seller is not willing to do. And so that's where you can actually get a GC involved and have the buyer take care of those things, of course, with the seller in agreement, talking to the attorney and making sure the buyer understands that they are investing into something that they technically do not yet own, even though they're under contract.
And the other thing to add to that too, because we've done that on a couple of my closings, I don't recommend painting in 98-degree weather. It's outside. It's not fun, and the paint will peel again. But the one risk that you are taking is that you're investing your time and your money on something that you don't own, which is exactly what Michelle has said. But if it doesn't close, you don't get anything back for any of that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's a risk that you have to take too. And I don't recommend having your client in the middle of the night go over and paint something in the pitch black. Not recommended. Hire someone like David who knows what he's doing. But
Yeah.
maybe that happened.
That's funny. Maybe it happens. So David,
I wasn't there. I can't prove anything.
right? So David, my other question, like for instances like this, like let's say that, we didn't know about repair that was needed until we have the appraisal, and, it's calling for X, Y, and Z to be completed. And seller, doesn't want to do it, or maybe we are on the seller side, we could, obviously anyone here that's an agent can represent both sides, but what is a typical turn time? Because everyone's telling me that, there's high demand for GCs, so they can't get a hold of anyone to do work. So what is a realistic expectation to have someone like yourself come out and take care of these items so that the transaction can continue and close?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question and an impossible one to answer. Of the 3 crews, I've got one booked through February of next year, another
Wow.
one through the end of the year, and another, I've got some spotty availability between now and the end of the year. So for me to service somebody, it would depend on the scope of the work. If it was a few days, I could take care of something fairly quickly. If it was 2 weeks, it might take longer. And I can imagine other contractors would be in the similar position. I think that's
Okay.
one of the reasons why, as a realtor, I think it's always good. I love the realtors that I meet that have a go-to GC. But I think it's important that you maybe have 1 or 2 on your bench as well, because that person might be tied up, for whatever reason, because it is very busy out there. We do deal a lot with between purchase agreement and closing work too. It's frequent, it happens a lot.
Thank you for your honest answer, because I do know that it's with the market the way it's been since last year, it's very difficult. There's a lot of demand for work. So yeah, realistic turn times. Yeah, so I agree. Having those resources is definitely going to help things move smoother, and is another asset to offer to your buyers and sellers, so they don't have to go out and find someone, because you already have those relationships built.
One of the things, and I'll just put on my little Mud City Jacks cap for a minute, is, we focus on that small to mid-size person, not the 10 plus property owner who's got a trust or a REIT or something big that's the vehicle that they're using for financing, but somebody that's doing it on their own or as a small group. So I think finding GCs like us that maybe cater to this space more is also going to help you out with your customers until they get to the big, leagues and they can afford those big players.
Thank you, David. Okay, so I think we have one more slide to get through here. Oh yes, I really want to hear about this.
So this one is just anecdotal in some ways. I mean, I've done the Google searches, and I'm sure maybe you have too. What's your best return on investment for projects? And just as a rule of thumb, I think you mentioned peeling paint, anything that's obvious, leaking roof, is obviously a must. Aside from that, as a property owner myself, I've kind of split them into 2 categories, and it's not always the same for every property, but there's some consistencies. So there's certain things that you want to do for rents to improve your rent situation. And I sort of put them not 100% in order, but kind of in order. And then certain things that you want to do for your financing, your insurance, your refi, your long-term stuff, eventual sale to a future buyer. And so I guess the one thing that pops up more often than not that people don't think about, all these other things are pretty common sense, is the security thing. Today, throwing in an internet line into your property with a little cell card or whatever, I mean, it's $20-30 a month. You can then have a camera-enabled access system to let shipments in if it's a delivery person, or let neighbors in or whatever. That security from everything from Section 8 investment all the way up to your high-end West Loop 8-figure stuff is going to make an impact for your buyers, both in terms of rents and in long-term costs. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions about these, but these are the major ones that have always popped up, at least in our limited experience, over the last 4 or 5 years playing in this multi-space.
Sorry if you hear my
David,
son
I'm assuming that you have architects, if an architect is needed.
Yeah, I know. because I work in the multi-space, we don't have any staff, architects or designers, but I've got go-to subs that I play with all the time. For the high-end North Shore type of interactive architect and design that a client like that might need, that's an area where we as a GC kind of fall down. I don't do super well in that high decision touch requirement, which is, again, because we're geared towards multi-unit space. But yes, long-winded, we have architects, designers that can help at the beginning and then all the way through the end of the process.
Cool, thanks.
Expediters to help with permits if you have that. Got a couple of people, one in particular, she's just fantastic. I don't know how she gets permits through. It's magic. Have a good expediter. It's the most valuable money you'll ever spend in the city.
Awesome. I think this is just good to have to also share with buyers. Buyers always ask me, like, especially if we're doing rehab loans, like where they should invest their money. And I'm like, talk to an agent. So for you agents on here, you probably have something already together, but I thought this was a really neat slide to share on the best investments for, short-term and long-term value on those rentals.
And Michelle, you might be able to speak to the long-term thing too. I mean, if somebody's refinancing and they've got a history of scheduled maintenance and security in place, they're probably going to get a better rate, probably going to get lower insurance costs and so on.
Insurance, yeah, they will get better insurance costs for sure.
And there's other tricks and things that you can do too beyond this, but offline, if anybody has questions, just know that this order is going to change for every property you run into slightly.
Hey, David, just a question. This is Ruby again. I've seen those expediters before. Regularly, if we get you as a GC, how much is an expediter extra? I know they're pretty expensive. I mean, they were great suits. They're in the building.
I would add anywhere from 2-3 on the low end to maybe 8 or 10 on the high end, depending on the size of your project. Okay. But if you're spending more than that, you're just putting money into a college fund for somebody.
Exactly. All right. Thanks.
The good ones are 2 to 10, depending on the project. I typically, 4,000 or 5,000 for a typical 4-unit is pretty common for us. And I'll budget that in before I budget a lot of other stuff because it makes, for anything permitted, it just makes all the difference. The average person trying to navigate the city of Chicago permitting process, total nightmare.
Right.
Worse than the DMV.
Right. I've experienced that. But anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Okay, so we are wrapping it up. So to help you just close more multi-unit sales, just kind of recapping, obviously communication. So simplifying those loan options to your buyers, so remembering that difference between that larger down payment option for the conventional, especially for investors. And for multi-units, the FHA is usually the most popular product that we have, but being mindful of, those rents having to really support that mortgage payment. So it's not just the borrower qualifying, but the property itself qualifying. And then obviously you're doing your CMAs, so you're running those cash flow analysis to help those that are looking to really get into real estate and understand what they're going to be receiving after expenses, not only just with the mortgage, but and then also any maintenance expenses, and then helping them understand like what expenses they may have up front when they have that inspection and they have, items listed that will have to be repaired coming soon, having a GC like Dave to be able to give you some cost estimates and turn times on getting those repairs completed. And so partnering up with people that are able to aid you in providing these resources to your buyers and or sellers is going to help close more loans and sales. So any questions?
I have one last question, David and Michelle, sorry. I know, in terms of financing, there's so many guidelines out there. Does it need, if the clients are getting a rehab loan to purchase, an as-is property, does it require an accredited GC?
So if they're going to get a renovation loan, the GC does have to be licensed and insured. And then we're also checking references to make sure that they have experience for the scope of work that's being financed. So if they're doing like a complete gut rehab, we want to make sure that they've actually have experience in doing that before. And we're also verifying that they have the liquidity, the assets to be able to fund the project throughout the project, because they're being paid in in different draws. So they have to have enough money to get things started and continued.
Correct.
So it's all done. Yeah, so there is a vetting process. I mean, we don't have like a very difficult approval process, but we do have to make sure that the person is going to be able to handle that job financially, and that there aren't any major complaints against them, because, you know, the buyer as well would want to know if, you know, there's been any judgments filed against this person because they didn't complete a job in the past. So there is that vetting process for them.
Okay, thanks.
That vetting process, I'll just reinforce, that Michelle offers is really good, because there's no barrier to entry to become a general contractor in Chicago. You just need to have citizenship, have insurance, and pay them a fee. There's no education requirements, there's no training, there's no certification. And so as a result, sure, there's some good ones. I'd like to think we're in that camp, but there's a lot of fly-by-night ones too. And so you really have to be wary when you're going out there. So that whatever Michelle was talking about, the vetting and all that, it's hugely valuable to the customer for peace of mind.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for attending today. I hope that you learned something new. And if you have any follow-up questions for David or myself, please contact me. Dave, do you want to put your info again in the chat just so we have it here? And then, yeah, we'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to talk over anything else.
Thank you both.
Thank you, guys.
There, I just sent my phone number in. Just feel free to call for anything. Like I say, I love talking about multi-units. I'll talk too much until somebody tells me to shut up. It's all I like doing.
This was really helpful today, David. Thank you so much for joining.
And
All right,
thank you,
guys.
Michelle.
Yeah. Okay, Nicole, I think we're all set. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and a better weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Goodbye.